All right, hello, welcome. Today we are going to be talking about domain events in DDD. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. As you have questions today, please feel free to post in the chat. We do run a subscribers only chat, so you do need to subscribe for at least 5 minutes before you can chat. But if you have questions along the way, I am watching chat as we do this. So we've got this going on. We're going to talk about domain events in DDD. Things that you need to be aware of, though, are as follows. So, we're going to talk about 3 different types of events. We're going to talk about traditional events, web events, and domain events. Because when you hear the term events, you might be coming at this from different mindsets. You may be coming at this from the mindset of web forms. How many of us have been there with that? You may be coming at this with the mindset of traditional events. Maybe you're a sysadmin who's used to the logs of it all. Maybe you know what domain events are, but you're not really familiar enough with them. So we'll talk about those here very shortly. So traditional events are also known as like system events, or you might hear them called log events. And these are used for things like notifications, monitoring, and logging. When it comes to traditional events, these are coming from external sources. So these are coming from the operating system, the database server, the application server, monitoring tools, web servers. These are coming from something outside of your environment. Just to level set on why we're talking about events in general and why domain events are different. With traditional events, think of them as typically a timestamp and minimal details. These include things like database connections getting established, files uploaded, web server requests, no references, things like that. Now, traditional events, in the case of our e-commerce example, we have a user who's going to submit an order. The web server is going to log that the order was submitted. That log might have some IDs to identify the transaction information, but it doesn't necessarily trigger anything. So if you come into this with the mindset of traditional events, this is what we're looking at, but domain events are so not these. Now you might be coming with the background of web events. And you might be like, hey, I'm a web developer. So am I. And so you might be thinking, well, are domain events related to web events? Not necessarily. I mean, web events are things that are human interaction. So you've got a browser, you've got buttons, people click, it responds. It can trigger business logic. But those interactions themselves are not business logic. They just trigger it. They're the inputs to business logic. Whereas domain events are the outputs. So let's talk about the whole topic of today's session, which is domain events. And how do these differ from traditional events, and how do they differ from web events? So with the domain events, these are significant occurrences. So it's not always, oh, something happened, we should throw a domain event. No. There's significant occurrences that happen within a business domain. And it's typically describing what happened. And it may trigger a state change or be capturing a state change. These are domain-centric. These are happening within the application, within the business domain of that application. This is not coming from the operating system, though you may be logging to those logs. That's not what a domain event. The domain event is initiated inside your application. And domain events are typically written in past tense. You see them in present tense, that's usually a command, not a domain event. Now, examples of some domain events you might see include things like order placed, or item added to cart, or payment received. These are domain events. So this is something happened, and there's probably a state change involved. Now, if you're thinking about the theme that I'm going, which is shopping, think about shopping online. Well, what happens when you place an order? When you place an order, that order place event can trigger multiple options. So it can trigger the inventory service, like, hey, an order was placed, now we have to lower our inventory in spots. But also the payment service, that person needs to pay for this order. And the shipping service, now we have to schedule a shipment and figure out how we make that happen. And the notification service. All of these services can be listening for this order placed event to happen. So that when that order placed event comes through, when it's published, then the services can go, oh, I see that it's published, now I need to act on it. The domain events typically are something that has happened significantly within the system that can then be triggering other events or other actions. Now, you're going to see that there's events, and where there's an event, there's a handler. And that handler is going to listen for the event. And it's going to handle the event when the event is published. And you can have multiple handlers listening for one event. So in our case here, we can have an inventory service listening for that order placed event. We can have the payment service listening for order placed. We can have shipping service listening for the order placed, and notification service listening for order placed. So in this case, we're looking at the order placed event. Now, mind you, this is not the only event that happens within our domain. So let's take a look at a sequence of domain events in a shopping process, specifically with creating the order. Okay, so when we create the order, this is what we have going on. I want to call out some of the different events here. So we've got this is a standard sequence diagram of our user interacting with the web app. And these are the 4 services that we called out earlier. So we have the order service, then we have our payment, inventory, and shipping services as well. Notice that when the user initiates the order, they select the item, it creates the order event. The order is created. Then we're going to update the inventory. That's updating the inventory. While the inventory is getting updated, order service can also create the payment event, and the payment service can be dealing with this at the same time. So we've got the inventory getting handled, the payments getting handled. We can also then have the shipping getting handled. So there's a shipping event, which gets handled by the shipping service. And then once all of that is taken care of, then there's an order confirmation event, which then sends the order confirmation to the user. So notice now we have events going on behind the scenes that have come from one. So the common pattern you're going to see is we have an event, something happened, that will trigger a command to trigger another event. We'll talk about commands and events here in a little bit, but just be aware that we've got our order placed event or order created event, and now we have 4 events triggered. That is common. Questions so far in the chat? And so far. All right. So in terms of the 3 types of events, just coming from the mindset of event, so you have your traditional, your web, your domain. The domain events, think of them as they start with the business logic. Their context is rich. We know what was done. We sometimes know the why. We sometimes know like the when. We know more details in a domain event than we usually do with a web event, and than we typically do for traditional events. Now, that said, traditional events, modernizing, getting more details, but for the most part, domain events usually are more rich than traditional events. Their purposes differ. Domain events, think of it as your business state change. It all goes back to business logic. The focus, traditional events are operationally. Web events are, we got a website and web interactions, so that's where your on blur, on double click, on context menu all happen. A domain event, that's business driven. All right, so let's talk about some of the purposes of domain events in DDD. So first, it enables asynchronous communication. So an event is published and multiple events can be handled in parallel. We don't have to wait synchronously. So it's not a case of, okay, my order is placed and now I got to do this part where I have to wait for the inventory system. Okay, inventory's done, now I need to deal with the payment. Or maybe I should deal with the payment first. So you don't have to do all of that in a serial or a synchronous state. You can do this asynchronously. Domain events also enable auditing and debugging. I'm going to show a code example toward the end where you'll get to see what this looks like. But we'll show how auditing can be done. We'll show that debugging makes it easier too, because if you have a history of the events that have happened, typically you're going to have some kind of timestamp to indicate when they've happened. You can look at this, organize it in a way that you can build reports off of it to see, okay, what happened when, oh, this event got fired here that shouldn't have, something else is up. And then you can look at traces at that point. So domain events enable auditing and debugging. They allow us to decentralize our architecture. We can have more flexible modular designs because the services don't need to be aware of them. What's nice about using something like a domain event and passing it to something like NServiceBus, for example, you can have a C# service calling to it. You can have a Java service calling to it. They're just subscribing to the events. They don't need to know about each other. There's no coupling of those services. They are decoupled. It's a good thing. When you think about domain events, domain-driven design should come to mind. If you're not familiar with domain-driven design, we've got a couple webinars out there that I've done on the topic as well. But domain events are the key component in domain-driven design. You can build the system around the concepts and rules that are specifically focused on the business domain. It is not about your technical. It is about the business. What's nice is once you understand the business, then you can figure out the technical. But this is all business-driven. When you have domain events, you can also deal with something called event sourcing. This allows you to capture your events in an event store, such as an event store DB, which is now known as current DB. But you can capture all these changes to a system and track them over time. This will allow you to build a more resilient system. When it comes time to use domain events, you can also test them. Publish your mock events and verify that the expected outcome is achieved. And we have examples of this in eShopOnWeb that we'll show, and then we'll talk about where we also use these later on. And when it comes to domain events and where to store them, where would you think you store them? It depends, of course, on what application you're dealing with. For small scale applications, you probably could get away with something in memory. But for prototyping, that's acceptable as well. But if you're scaling, then that's not what you need. I'm going to stress this again for those who think, oh, I can just deal with this prototype in memory and then go ahead and roll with it. It doesn't always roll easily to go from in-memory to message queues or in-memory to something bigger. You have to design your application appropriately for that kind of scale. In-memory alone, not so scalable. Message queues, that's where we get into persistence and scalability and replayability. Different products offer different things. I am not here to pitch a product, but I am here to let you know which ones are at least out there. Event storage databases, when I think about those, I think of the event storage DB, which is currently rebranding as current DB. That's current with a K. So now storing these domain events, where do you choose to put them? I've got more details on that, but understand that it's important to store them. It's important to store them going back to auditing, going back to tracing and debugging. Now with message queue options, there are a lot of options out there. So Redis, Apache's got a couple products like Kafka and Ignite. Azure Service Bus, NServiceBus, RabbitMQ, Mass Transit. There's all sorts of options that are out there. Today's demos, we're going to look at MediatR. We're also possibly going to look at NServiceBus as well if time allows. All right, let's talk about some benefits and drawbacks of domain events. But when I think about the benefits of domain events, I'm going to be thinking about things like the loose coupling. Again, going back to the services. Our services are not dependent on each other. We're not tied to domain events. There's like no tie there other than the consumer, the event. So when an event happens, I'm listening for a particular event to happen, then I'm going to do my thing only when that event happens. So if the event doesn't happen, then I don't have to do my thing. We're talking about things like improved performance. So you're only publishing those events when they're necessary. You're only executing the code when it's needed. It's not like you're executing it all the time. Auditability. So when it comes to domain events with the auditability of things, think of it as you are logging these events. You've got your timestamps. You've got the what happened, what changed, probably having the who changed as well, when they were made. This is all there to make sure that everything is captured so that you can go, okay, what happened here? With the auditability too, it also gives the idea of who went through these. Don't see the who as a blame. See the who as a more details kind of deal. It's quick as humans for us to go, oh, well, this went wrong because it was this person and they did that. That's not necessarily true. The thing is, auditability allows us to go, oh, okay, this went wrong because Sudoku did this transaction. Sudoku, what happened here? And then you talk through the transaction and gives you even more clues as to what's going on. So think of auditability and the identifying part not as a blame, but as an understanding more. And with decoupling, domain events allow us to decouple the event producer from the consumer. So the system is going to generate the event is not necessarily the system that's going to consume the event. It can be. For today's demo, it will be, but it doesn't have to be. So today's demo is a smaller demo, but next month we'll be talking about NServiceBus, and that'll be a bigger demo, and hopefully we'll be able to show then how outside systems can capture the events from other systems. Then there's testability. So with testability, we can mock out the producers, we can mock out the consumers. Again, going to the external site can generate the event and we can consume it. What does that look like? We can test it if we don't have access right away. Now, some of the drawbacks to domain events, because once we get into async, you know that there's also going to be drawbacks with that. Going to the auditability and debugging, well, it's nice that we have the details. Sometimes it's that timing that is our pain point. Another thing is the increased complexity of it all. They're requiring us to manage the lifecycle events, make sure they're delivered correctly, make sure they're delivered in a timely way, make sure they're delivered in a correct order. There's a lot of complexity that can happen, especially if they're doing parallel processing. Higher responsibility. So we also have to ensure that the events are delivered correctly and that are handled properly. And sometimes that's even harder to guarantee because sometimes you're just the event producer, you're not the consumer. The limited flexibility. So domain events, they are a little more rigid than other things. They can always go between bounded contexts, but they are following a specific format and a structure based on whatever the producer knows to create. So as a consumer, you might be consuming data in a way that you're not actually anticipating. They might say, oh, yeah, you want JSON. Well, guess what? Today's not your day and you're getting SAM or XML. Okay, so now I gotta deal with that. Or I have a particular schema that I'm going to use that is not the same schema that the consumer is expecting. So that's going to happen. When it comes to over-engineering too, you can overthink it easily. You can create more overhead that's not necessarily needed. You need to look at your application and think, does my application really need domain events? Or do I need to take a different approach? You're probably wondering too, how do we know where our domain events are? How can we identify them? This comes to one of my favorite topics, which is event storming. Event storming is a process that we talk about in multiple webinars, multiple blog posts, but think of it this way. Let's say that we have a domain, a business domain. We're going with online shopping because online shopping is something people can relate to. All right, so we need to understand more about this online store. So let's get everybody in a room with sticky notes, because sticky notes are what we do. In fact, I think I still have some sticky notes, including orange ones, on my desk. So we got sticky notes. And on those sticky notes, we're going to write what we know about the domain. Usually start the question of what happened. Order placed. Now, everybody's going to get together with their sticky notes. Everybody has their own perceptions, their own know-how. Or getting them all together on a whiteboard, on a wall. I've done this virtually as well using Miro. So there are various tools out there, but you get everybody together to build that shared understanding. Sometimes you are going to discover a business domain. Sometimes you're going to explore a process. So for example, with e-commerce, what I do all the time is a checkout process. Because it's a process, it has a lot of steps, and you want to understand that process. You want to understand how it works, the different events that occur. You want to understand maybe the user experience and how to make it better. How do you keep retaining your customers? How might you be driving away customers without knowing? So event storming allows us to get out of our heads, share our understanding, and have those conversations. Secret is, it is not necessarily about the sticky notes, about the conversations that come up with those sticky notes. Now, so that's pretty much the slide here, is being able to understand the domain itself, the product, the business unit, whatever you're trying to understand. Processes, processes happen. Event storming will help you to understand how systems interact. So if you have an external system that is actually your event producer and you're an event consumer for domain events, you might need to do some event storming to understand how these things interact. And if you have to build systems, be it legacy systems and dealing with how to rebuild it and how to modernize it, or if you're lucky enough to work in greenfield, then this is what you deal with. All right, so we're going to go quickly on event storming so you understand how that ties into domain events. Because when I have that aha moment, I see other people go, oh, this makes sense. We talk about event storming in another webinar. I'll include a link in the YouTube video, but just know that this is something like what it could look like. I'm going to zoom in because I want you to see. These are written in past tense. So we have entered payment details, we have shipping costs calculated, things like that. We also have then who is responsible for different systems. So when we think about commerce, we think about things like, is that address that we're shipping to the right address? What happens if the address isn't valid? So we have what's called pain points. These come in event storming as well. But the key thing is that orange sticky note. That orange sticky note is your domain event. So again, what is event storming? This is where you're getting out of your head, different colors, different things. The main things are the orange sticky note and the blue sticky note. The blue sticky note are commands, so think of them as do stuff. But the orange ones, these are our domain events. These are the events that happen. Are all events turned into domain events? Maybe, not necessarily. It depends on the significance and what you need to capture. And when we talk about event storming and understanding domain events, who's going to be in the collection of event storming to help identify these events? So you've got a facilitator, like someone like me, who can come in and ask the important questions to get people thinking and to get them out of their heads and onto sticky notes and into conversations. You have the people with the questions, like what is the system really? What's really going on here? Then the people with the answers, who are the domain people. So you can use event storming to help identify these events and what really is an event. Again, answers a question, what happened? It's written in past tense, and it is commonly done with an orange sticky note. Now, I assure you, I'm not making this up. I didn't get to pick any of the colors. So why is this an orange sticky note? Well, it wasn't me. It's Alberto Brandolini's fault. Alberto Brandolini is the father of event storming. He created it. He's done event storming workshops for a long time now. He did a presentation with 50,000 orange stickies later. This one here is 100,000 orange stickies later. When it comes to doing event storming and understanding events, he's the guy to go to. We do these as well. The only thing is I don't count the stickies, so I don't know when I'm going to hit 100,000. Now, when you're trying to understand how do you identify domain events, what could this look like digitally? It could look something like this, where it starts with one sticky note. Now, typically I'm doing this on a Miro board, but for understanding it in general, it looks something like this, where you have the chaos of orange sticky notes appearing. Usually we'll have duplicates as well. So when I run this session online, I do this in what we call a blind view or a private view. So you can see other people putting sticky notes out there, but you can't see what they say because we don't want you to overthink well, what if that person put this down? Or no. Deduplicating is another step in there. So once all of your events are dumped out, you start with the events, then you may do something like order them in a timeline if you're doing process, or if you're trying to understand the domain, you might do something like this where you sort them and try to find some reason about them. And then you could say, okay, we have a cart process, we have a customer, and we have an order. When it comes to event storming, you could do it this way. You could do it in a timeline and then start to understand how your events flow. But this is how you identify domain events. This is how I get my clients to identify domain events. They're not really sure looking at their code because they get so consumed in code and process in general that sometimes those domain events, even though they seem obvious, they're missed because you can't see the forest from the trees. All right, so how do these domain events work? Well, there's typically the pattern of event and commands. So the event is the thing that contains the data for processing. The handler is the thing that does the processing. The event is what is produced, the handler is doing the consuming. And we'll take a look at this here in a little bit. When we look at our code demos, so you're going to see Ardalis shared kernel. Recently moved it into a NimblePro shared kernel package, and we're in the process of renaming namespaces. So for today's demo, I just left it at ardalis.sharedkernel, but that'll be changing. The other thing that we call out is domain event base. So this is what the order created event is going to look like in eShopOnWeb. I say is going to because currently I have it in a branch and I will be merging it to main this afternoon. But just so you can see, our shared kernel is where the domain event base lives. And our event, so our event is going to take in whatever it needs. Now this particular event was done simply. We actually have in the code demo, it's broken out a little further. And I'll point out the reason why when we look at the code. We have the event. Now let's look at the handler. And the handler, we're using MediatR. So the demos that I have for today are the clean architecture template that we use. So Ardalis' clean architecture template, which already has this built in. And it uses MediatR. And eShopOnWeb, which we have inherited from Microsoft and now maintain, also has MediatR in it. So we'll show you how we included that in. But the order created event handler, some things I point out. So there's the dependency on MediatR, and then you need to implement the iNotification handler of that domain event. We're going to look at the code here in Visual Studio shortly. The last thing I want to point out with code is adding MediatR. Make sure you point out that you register the services. So by default, eShopOnWeb does have this basket view model service registered for MediatR. I added the order service for today's demo. All right, any questions so far? All right, we're getting ready to go into code demos here. So some things to note. So today's demos are using either .NET 8 or .NET 9. I'm not really fully sure if they've all been converted over to .NET 9, so we'll look at that. But we're going to pay attention to the domain events that are called out, designing the event classes only with the details you need, creating the event handlers. You can consider an event store. We're going to do everything in memory today, but just so you're aware. So first up, let's look at Ardalis' clean architecture template. And then just so you're aware of what's coming after that, will be eShopOnWeb. And if time allows, I may show the NServiceBus one as well. All right. All right, let's go ahead and switch over to our eShopOnWeb demo and clean architecture. We're going to do clean architecture first. With our clean architecture, I want to close everything here so that you're not going to get overwhelmed with it all. And we'll switch over to laptop. There we go. So now you should be able to see my Visual Studio. And then again, that's because I wanted to make sure that you understand that we have a lot going on. So you'll see we've got the clean architecture template, that there's .NET Aspire, there's core, there's infrastructure, service defaults, web use cases, things like that. And there's also the tests for it. Now, the thing we wanted to note was the events. Clean architecture, the template already goes down that path to start. So you can see we've got our contributor deleted event, the contributor deleted handler. I'll show you the deleted event. You can see this is a very simple event. Now this one here, the domain event base, is using the Ardalis shared kernel domain event base. Just so you can see dependency-wise what we're looking at with the clean architecture template, that actually references the Ardalis shared kernel. And when we go to eShopOnWeb, that's going to reference NimblePro shared kernel. It is the same shared kernel package. We're in the process of redoing the namespacing on that. All right, so we have our event. Now, this contributor deleted event. So contributor deleted, notice past tense. That's again going back to the orange sticky notes and understanding the process. And so we have a contributor ID. Now the handler for this, those are dependencies. Go to our handler. So here's our handler. In this particular project, the handler, what's going to happen is you're going to see when we delete a contributor, that it's going to say handling for this ID. Then it'll send an email, depending on how the email sender is sent up. Now, that said, what does that look like? So if I go to our references, you can see there's our handler. Over here is our service. So we're using MediatR. MediatR is going to publish the event. The handler will then look out for the event, and the handler will pick up the event when it's published, and it's going to execute the code. And looking back at the handler, how do you know that this handler is going to handle that event? Notice this is a iNotification handler contributor deleted event. So the event is called out here in the T position. So it's an iNotification handler T event type. That said, we're passing in the logger for the handler. Okay. So what's going on in the delete contributor? Well, we're going to delete that contributor. Typically, the flow is going to be, I'm going to do something, and then I'm going to publish the event. So that's what you see going on here, is going to do the delete and make sure not found on the delete. And then once it's delete, we're going to publish that. Now, once we publish that, then we'll do the result success afterwards. So we'll publish a domain event. At that point, we don't care how it's going to get handled. We can just say, hey, we deleted it. The handler will do its thing separately. Beauty of async. All right. The other thing I'm going to point out here is that for clean architecture, you'll see it labeled as internal. All right. Run this. Pull it over because I suspect it's going to pop up in my other monitor. All right. Bring that over to the correct monitor so you can see. So this is Clean Architecture Web. I'm running it. It's got .NET Aspire, and in .NET Aspire, it's already set to show the Swagger URL because developers, where we live. But you can see in here the contributor endpoints. And so we've got endpoints. If you're not sure who we want to delete, let's first get our contributors. Execute that. And zoom in so you can see it. So we've got a couple contributors. We have Ardalis and we have Snowfrog. And Ardalis does a lot on this, and I don't deal with Snowfrog as much, so we'll delete Snowfrog just so you can see what this is going to look like. If I go to my Visual Studio, set a break here. And when I go back to the Swagger, and we're going to delete. We're going to delete 2. I'll execute. Notice Visual Studio is like, hey, I got some stuff going on. And now we're in the handler. So it did the publish of the event. Now you might be wondering, how do I know that it published successfully? Because I'm here in the handler. I wouldn't be in the handler otherwise. So in order for me to get in the handler, this contributor deleted event has to be published so that I can do the log and kind of deal. And you can see here that we will send it. There's our email sender. This is using the MIME-kit email sender. In another demo, I typically use a different one. This one will fail, just so you can see. No tricks up my sleeve. Put over there. It does fail. The part it does fail on is trying to send because I don't have it sent. That's okay. Just the fact that you could see that the domain event was triggered and it was handled. In Clean Architecture template, that's how that works, is through the contributor ID as a demo. All right, so I'm going to stop that. Now, the other thing I want to point out are that events and handlers do appear in the aggregates. So from an organization standpoint, if you're like, where do I put it? This is typically where you'll see it if we're using a Clean Architecture-like format. So Clean Architecture template, we're in core, that's where you're going to see it. You're going to see something similar as well with the eShopOnWeb. Let's take a look at the tests just to see if there's anything in there. So what I usually do a search for, I'll come to my Solution Explorer. I want to do a search for, there's a contributor did. Just an event and a handler. There are no tests written for this one. We'll show tests in eShopOnWeb, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. All right, so Ardalis' Clean Architecture template. This has been in there for a while now, so if you're like, I have an older version of the template, that's fine. Update your version. .NET 8, .NET 9, newer versions. You'll see the deleted event and deleted handler. These are in the core. These are also in the sample. All right, next. So the next one we're going to look at is eShopOnWeb. Now, eShopOnWeb, I have 2 demos if time allows. I'm going to bring eShopOnWeb over. I'm going to close Clean Architecture since I don't need it. I will bring eShopOnWeb over so you all can see it. Let's flip over to eShopOnWeb. There's eShopOnWeb. All right. So eShopOnWeb, this is in GitHub. It's GitHub Nimble Pros eShopOnWeb, formerly from the Microsoft side. They have willed it to us to maintain. So what you're looking at here, this is eShopOnWeb. It is currently in a branch. This will be in main later this afternoon, so in the next couple hours. And what you'll see for that, we have our, it's going to look like Clean Architecture. So let me collapse some of these so you can see that. You've got the application core, you've got your infrastructure layer, you've got your public API, you've got your web. We're going to look at application core. Hello, Khalil, welcome. Good to see you here. All right, how you doing today? We're going to first look at the, put this out of the way. Show you our event. So this is the domain event that I've added into eShopOnWeb. I did create an events folder in the core under the order aggregate. We're going to do a when the order is created. Let's make sure we publish an order created event. Let's do that. So that's what's going on there. Now this is an order. Order being the class, order being the property on our event, just so you can see what's going on. I'm using the primary constructor feature. Now our event also has a handler. So again, the event and handler, order aggregate, events and handlers folders. Here's our order created handler. We're still using MediatR in this demo. And we're passing in, we've got our handler logger. We also have an iEmail sender. Our iEmail sender in this demo only has 3, so it has a subject and a message. So it's just like, okay, fine. I create a version whenever I'm dealing with our sample demos where there's an email sender. I will create a logger email sender specifically so we can see what's getting sent and giving us that transparency from a debugging standpoint. Because realistically, do we want to send email? Not when we're testing. In production, yes. So what we've got here is our handler. Our handler is going to handle the order created event. Notice again the iNotification handler sub T. That T tells you what event is getting handled. We've got our log information. So again, what are we putting in there? And then we're going to send the email async. So far, this looks pretty straightforward, like we saw in our Clean Architecture. Still using MediatR. There's that. Then the other part of it, so it's typically you have a producer and a consumer. And in today's demos, our producer and consumer in the same application, but they don't need to be necessarily. But it is for our demo purposes today. Next month, it's going to be a little bit different. So then what we also have here is event and handler. What's going to publish that event? Who is going to produce the event? And the event in this case is coming from the order service. So if I scroll down a little further into our order service, not URL composer, our order service. Our order service specifically, I'm going to drop down to create order async. And in our create order async, once I create that order, then I'm going to create my event. Then I'm going to publish the event. So when I create an order in eShopOnWeb, this will then trigger that order created event. That order created event is then going to hit this handler. This handler is then going to do some things here. Set a breakpoint, as I do. And we'll go ahead and, as I've been changing branches, I'm going to do a quick clean and build. eShopOnWeb is something I live in. So if you have questions about it, feel free to ask. What we deal with often. All right. Once that's built, we're going to go ahead and tell it to run. Okay. Run it. I'll bring it over. All right. Here's eShopOnWeb. And let's go shopping. So we'll have a cup of .NET. Continue shopping. About a cup of tea. This gets me every time. Every single time, that cup of tea. In fact, you know what? Let's get some for the whole house. So there's 4 of us here. Update that. All right. These could all be triggering events, by the way. These could be triggering domain events of, hey, the basket has updated. Hey, the cart has been abandoned for a while. We should send an email. Hey, do you really want to leave this behind? You know, we can give you 10% off on this card if you come back. That kind of stuff. Events. It's all events under the covers that can trigger these things. And so, okay, we've got these updated. Now let's go ahead and check out. I need to log in. I'm going to log in as my demo user. Yeah, I know Chrome. This password is used. It's also in the README, so I'm not concerned. All right, now when I click Pay Now, this will then create the order itself. So we're going to transfer from what's known as a basket into an order. So we'll say Pay Now. Notice I'm in the handler. So we've already published that event. That event is that order created event. And now the handler's like, hey, we're here. So that's how you know that your event got published successfully. We'll look at another example here in a minute. Yeah, we've got time. I can show you the other one. So this is what you can see here. Got the order placed, got an ID, and then that sent email async, which if I continue through, but we got it. You got to see the domain event was triggered, and then we consumed it. All right, so that's eShopOnWeb in its current state using MediatR. Now, let me flip over to another branch right now. So we have eShop on NServiceBus. That's going to be coming out this afternoon. Everything is one of those where it's like, hey, what about this idea? What about this idea? And I'm like, I've got this. But I'm not going to rush the new repo in time for the webinar. But I do have it in a branch. So let me switch over to that branch. What's it complaining about? Gotta stop debugging. And we'll swap this over so you can see what's going on. All right, so what questions do you have so far before I switch over to Visual Studio? Hello, do you have any questions? I see you over in the chat. All right, well, let's flip on over then. So back to the Visual Studio. This is looking at using NServiceBus for domain events. Now, here at Nimble Pros, we're a particular partner. So Particular Software is the company behind NServiceBus, and you'll see Service Pulse and Service Insight. So any questions you have about that, my teammates and I can do what we can to assist. But I want to show you how we have it hooked up into eShopOnWeb. So I'm going to show you first the event. I'm going to do a search for the event. So you can see it's under Application Core, Entities, Order Aggregate. Now this will be in our new repo, which is eShop on NServiceBus this afternoon. So when you get the thank you email, I will include that new link as well. Now our order created event is a little bit different here. Notice that there's no MediatR reference up at the top. We're now using NServiceBus, which means now we're going to implement iMessage. But does that really change anything else about this? Not technically. I ended up going and calling out the properties because we get into the funkiness of JSON serialization. And it was complaining, and I finally was like, we're just going to go piece by piece. That's what you see going on in here is the joys and pains of fighting JSON serialization. You're probably wondering about why. Bear with me on this. We have this order created event. And then we've got the order created handler. So the difference in the event is with NServiceBus, we implement iMessage. Now with order created handler is now our order created handler. Our handler lives in a .NET worker. Why? NServiceBus, and the way it does its pricing with the endpoints, we're using a worker so you can see the endpoint. We'll look at the worker package here in a minute. Actually, you know what? Let's just look at it now. So we add this eShopOnWeb worker project. Now, why did I call it that? Because I wanted to be clear at the time. I forgot that we took off the eShopOnWeb prefixes, so that's why it's there. But you'll see in our worker, we get rid of the worker.cs that it normally comes with. We have our program CS and order created handler. I showed you the event with iMessage. Let's look at the handler. So the handler is going to get, instead of the iNotification, it's going to be the iHandle messages. And it's going to say the type of event for the iHandle messages. So it's iHandle messages type T event type. And so iHandle messages order created event. So this web worker is going to listen for that event. And then when it gets it, it's going to handle it. So there's our event type is coming in as part of the handler. And you can see here, I'm just doing some logging, and then I'm returning task completed task. And that's just so I could get it the task that it needs, because that's what it requires. Now, next month in our webinar on NServiceBus, we'll get into more details as to, is it just handle, or is there also other options? We'll talk about the intricacies of NServiceBus and a lot more that you can do. Today, we're just talking about domain events and how they can be done in here. Now, program.cs. So you'll see we have a using NServiceBus here. I use NServiceBus also, but I also extracted out the configuration. I'll show you why I extracted out the configuration, but just so you can see, when you do NServiceBus in the configuration, this is what I did. We've got our endpoint configuration. We're telling it which endpoint it needs to hit. This use serialization system JSON serializer is why my event is structured the way it is, because I kept running into serialization issues. Now, there's the learning transport. More on that next month. But for this month, know that I had to update my git ignore because there's a .learning transport folder that it creates. You don't want to check that into Git, so we added that to the git ignore. But the learning transport is nice because it allows you to work with NServiceBus in a development environment, and then you can see how things work and it'll store it in memory. Promise you, we're going to run the demo and I'll show you no tricks up my sleeve, so you can see what that looks like. All right, so the transport, We also do the routing. We tell if there's failed messages, where do we want those failed messages to go to? And also, we want to audit the messages, where do we want those audits to go to? Now, this configuration, you're seeing it in the worker. Use it somewhere else as well. So this setting here, this builder.use NServiceBus, I do a search for use NServiceBus. Bring my find and replace on the screen so you can see it. So you can see we also have it in the web. And web's going to use that same configuration. Now, what does this look like? So when is this all happening? When is this getting published? I'm going to run this. I'm running the HTTPS profile. I do have multiple startup projects right now. Here's my eShopOnWeb. Don't see the other one, so let's do this. We'll close our eShopOnWeb and double check our startup project. So typically you want to include that worker as part of the startup. Don't see any of them bold, webs bolded. Let's fix that. All right, right click, figure startup projects. We want web to start, the eShopOnWeb worker to start. So multiple projects, apply, okay, and let's try that again. HTTPS profile would have worked if we were just running locally without the NServiceBus part, but NServiceBus and the worker, I want to be able to show you that too. So, bring some things over. eShopOnWeb, this one here, just so you can see, it talks about NServiceBus. I already have a license. I'll walk through the license stuff. My teammate Kyle McMaster has a great series on our blog about NServiceBus and getting started, and I used a bunch of that to get started. But I've dealt with NServiceBus with clients before too, and it's easy to get started in a development environment. You fill out a form that asks for your name, your email address, and then they'll send you the license and the email to set up the license. It makes it super easy. You can see here where auditing messages are going to audit, so that feature is turned on. Other thing you can see is this one here. So this is my Visual Studio debugging stuff is also going on in the background. All right, so we're going back shopping. And something that you should know is those are the only changes I've really made. So I can go back to, I want a cup of tea. Let's get 6 of those. Continue shopping. This one, let's add a hoodie, because I like hoodies. And let's go check out. Sign in as our demo user. Yeah, I know, change the password. It's in the README. Can't be any more exposed, I promise you. The demo app. All right, so we're getting some mugs, getting a blue sweatshirt. We haven't fired off our event yet, just again to show no tricks up our sleeve. Nothing here for this worker. So I'm going to say pay now. Says thanks for your order. I come over to here. Notice this is the worker, so this is the handler for the event. This is NServiceBus. NServiceBus is saying, hey, we had an order created event, and then this is what I have going on in my handler. I grab the timestamp, I grab the order number, I show how many units was ordered, I show the total, I also show the number of line items. So again, to give you an idea of, hey, you don't have to use MediatR. You can use NServiceBus. You can use RabbitMQ. You can use Kafka. You can use various other tools as well. I chose NServiceBus because this is what we use at Nimble Pros with a lot of our clients. And again, being a particular software partner, it helps. All right. So today we looked at domain events. We looked at what are they in DDD. We talked about how do you even identify them for your application. That's event storming. If you have any questions about event storming, please also reach out to me. I love talking about event storming and love working with you so you can see how it can help you. We also talked about how do you get started with domain events in C#. So we looked at the clean architecture template. We looked at eShopOnWeb using MediatR, which is already in it. And we're talking about today also eShop on NServiceBus, which is a new repo, brand new as of this morning. Again, you can use this with different consumers and producers as well. Now that said, what's next? So next month and in August, we have our webinars that are going to be done an hour later, just due to some scheduling conflicts. It's summer, I'm a mom, have to deal with that kind of stuff. Next month, we're talking about a lap around NServiceBus. And so you'll hear the different stories that my teammate Kyle had run into, because I've captured that stuff in some of his blog posts into the presentation. We'll have more demos of NServiceBus and what you can do with it. In August, we're talking about .NET Aspire. We use Aspire with eShopOnWeb. We use it with a bunch of our other clients as well. So you'll be able to see how we get to work with that. If you have any questions along the way about the webinars, or if you want to bring us in to do training for your devs, if you want to do event storing but don't know where to start, I will gladly facilitate. Reach out to us. Let us know how we can help you. This link, bit.ly/contactnp, goes to the Nimble Pros page with all the information on how to reach us. Rest assured there are humans on the other side of that as well. You'll reach Steve or Michelle or one of our teammates, so please contact us and let us help you, because this is what we do. We help better software development, and we deliver. All right, thank you all for joining this week, or this month. Thank you all. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out. Thank you.